afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. Vermonters have a new resource to help prepare for whatever a changing climate may bring our way. University of Vermont Extension recently hired a farming and climate change coordinator. His job responsibilities revolve around assisting Vermont agriculture to adapt to and mitigate the impacts of a changing climate. It's a pleasure to welcome Joshua Faulkner. He is the Farming and Climate Change Program Coordinator with Extension's Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start off talking a little bit about your background.
Sure. I was born and raised in southern West Virginia on a farm. We had anywhere from 35 to 50 head of beef cattle, kind of your typical small hillside West Virginia farm. Raised some sweet corn for roadside stand, had some 4-H pigs, 4-H dairy calves, kind of your typical farm kid life. But those experiences really got me interested in making agriculture part of my career. And I did that when I went on to Virginia Tech and studied agricultural engineering, or how they call it is biological systems engineering, and then on to Cornell University for my master's and PhD, also in agricultural and environmental engineering. Those are broad fields, but within those departments, I've focused on soil and water resources and how we manage those on farms. So those were those are my experiences through education on the farm, and then when I finished at Cornell, I went on to West Virginia University, where I was the Agricultural Engineering Extension Specialist for 4 years, and just came to Vermont earlier this year, and I'm glad to be here.
And so, what are you going to focus on as far as Vermont is concerned? I mean, I know that you've done a lot of similar work in different areas, but in Vermont, what do you think is going to be the focus?
Well, I think that there's a huge challenge facing farmers right now in terms of these extreme events, extreme precipitation events, these storms. Just this summer, I think we had, some places had 20 inches of rain in 6 weeks, and that's a real challenge for farmers to deal with. And I think primarily things like soil erosion and losing the valuable soil in your field will become more and more important as we face this changing climate and these extreme weather events. I actually brought a slide of that. Actually, this is some work I did in New York State when I was at Cornell, and this was a work on farms that are not that much different than some of the farms in Vermont. This is a dairy wastewater system for taking one of the sources of wastewater that are generated on dairies and treating in alternative ways. Not so, it saves farmers money. They don't have to store all that water and then spread it onto their fields. This is very fuel and cost intensive. So this was just an alternative way of handling that wastewater.
So it's helping with nutrient management.
That's exactly right. It allows the farmers to keep those nutrients applied onto their, someplace maybe they're growing some hay or a forage crop, and then harvesting that and reusing, keeping those nutrients in the cycle on the farm.
So that there's sort of a more even distribution of water too, I would imagine, as far
Absolutely. It's that photo I showed, the field that was receiving that wastewater, you can see in the lower left-hand corner where the water comes out of the distribution system. That was the best hay that farmer had on the field. It just had lots of moisture during the dry periods, and of course lots of nutrients as well.
And so you also did some work with farmers in the Chesapeake Bay Watershed as well.
That's right. That was a big part of what I did at West Virginia University. It was as an ag engineer, it's a very broad field, so you get tasked with anything from structures to machinery to handling facilities, but my background was in soil and water resources, and there was a real need in West Virginia to assist farmers in the state with meeting the expectations of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. I think some of your viewers are probably familiar with TMDL, Total Maximum Daily Load, where one of those is being developed for Lake Champlain here in Vermont. This was a much larger one, covered 64,000 square miles, and focused on more than phosphorus. It focused on nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. Encompassed parts of 6 states, and it was a lot of what I did was work with farmers on different techniques and management practices they could use on their farms to help meet the expectations of that TMDL, and then also assist state and federal agencies with strategy development as a state for the agricultural sector within the state of West Virginia.
And can some of those solutions be translated to Vermont farms?
I think so. You know, it's funny. There's a lot of similarities between West Virginia and Vermont, especially in terms of topography and these water quality challenges that the farmers are facing in both states, and the size of farms. There aren't a lot of huge farms in West Virginia, a lot of small farms, especially when you get up into the hills and into the mountains, just like we have here in Vermont. In particular, there's a research project that I was working on in West Virginia that we've already started to implement here in Vermont on a farm, and this is a wood chip feeding area, or wood chip wintering area, kind of like a barnyard built using wood chips instead of concrete or earth or dirt, what you would typically see, and it's cheaper than concrete, and it allows the farmer to keep their nutrients, keep their manure on the farm, scrape those wood chips off, compost them, and then reapply them to their crops or hay fields. So it's a really cool solution, and what most excites me about it is that it allows the farmer to absorb a lot of the rainfall that falls on their barnyard. Instead of concrete where it would all run off,
right,
those wood chips absorb the water and then re-evaporate it, so you have a lot less runoff than you would from a conventional barnyard.
Well, we've certainly had a lot of rain recently,
yes,
and record rainfall in the past few years. Is there something that you plan to work on at UVM concerning like large amounts of rain?
Absolutely, you know, and this is, I think we can expect more and more of these. All indications say that we're going to have more and more rain. There's a range of possibilities, but I think that we can expect more rain, and we should prepare for that, especially extreme events. And I think one of the primary focuses of my work will be working with farmers to build their soil quality, to incorporate organic matter, build the structure of their soils, so that when we do have these extreme events like we had in July, and I have a photo from a farm in Williston, and it's a little tough to tell, but you can see that there's just some incredible gully erosion,
right,
and this farmer's losing soil out of his fields. And that soil, to a farmer, that soil's the foundation of his business,
right,
and so I hope to work with farmers on different approaches to improving the quality of that soil, and doing some demonstrations along the way. One of my favorite demonstration tools is a rainfall simulator that I was able to use in West Virginia. Here's a photo, and we're working on acquiring one of these in Vermont as well. But this just does a fantastic job of taking soils that are managed differently. And there's a second photo that shows a little bit of a close-up, and you can see that we move all the way from the left, just a conventional till soil, to the right, which is a hay field that's been in hay for 30 years. And this apparatus captures the runoff and erosion in the buckets in the front, and there's just so many light bulb moments with farmers when they see this, and they see the processes that occur at a larger landscape scale, and it shrinks them down to where you actually can see it and see the impact of how you manage your soils on runoff and erosion.
It makes a huge difference.
It does, it does.
And so I know that one of the problems that we've had was, you know, we talk about a 100-year storm, and hurricane or tropical storm Irene hit. We thought, well, that's our 100-year storm, and then the next summer we get even more rain. And you seem to think that this is inevitable. This is going to keep happening, and you think too that in between these huge rainstorms, there's going to be increasing drought.
That's right. That's right. And that's really the weird part of these predictions, is that we'll have these extreme events, but they'll be interspersed by these really dry periods, and that's really hard to adapt to for farmers. When you have lots of rain and then no rain, and lots of rain and no rain, that's just a really tough situation. But I think building our soil quality and building organic matter into our soils can also help store water in those soils for those drought periods. So we kind of have this multiple benefits of when we work on our soils and build this foundation on farms. We can handle the extreme events, and we can also handle the drought periods as well, or better handle those periods.
So it's a way to sort of take advantage of all the water that comes rather than having it wash away your land.
That's exactly right.
And then you have that reservoir for when you do have the dry times.
Right, and you know that's a big part of it. Trying to keep water on our farms where we can use it, and building soils that are well drained. And I think that's going to be a big part of some of the research I do here and the outreach I do here at UVM is developing solutions for landscape storage, keeping water on the farms, because farms are such a big part of our landscape, and trying to work with some of the existing best management practices like farm ponds and then actually have a slide that equates soils to a sponge, and if we can build our soils to become more like sponges so that they soak up water and not allow it to all run off and into our river channels and result in potentially downstream flooding, I think we've really achieved something in terms of the larger implications for climate change and more flooding.
And so we've been talking about farms, but this is really research and practices that can go beyond that.
That's right. Some of these concepts can be applied, for example, in urban, suburban, and urban settings, trying to store water up in the landscaping instead of sending that water directly to storm drains and into streams and rivers, where it can result in downstream problems and damage. That's right.
And so even for municipalities and also for homeowners.
Yep, absolutely. Rain gardens, things like that, rain barrels, ways that homeowners, even on their own property, just trying to reduce the amount of impermeable area on folks' properties can really help store water in the landscape. And you know, you may think you just have a small yard, but it adds up if everyone does a little bit to keep water, incoming rainfall on their property. It can have a big impact.
Is there one thing that farmers should be thinking about as far as the first step to sort of implementing some of these ideas?
I think building their soils is the number one thing that they can do, and that's there are a couple. That's a little bit of a vague term, but just trying to use organic sources of fertilizer, incorporating more organic matter, disturbing the soils less if we use some more of the conservation tillage or no tillage types of farming, and then also maintaining some sort of cover, whether it be residue or cover crops or vegetation on our soils. These really go a long way, and are simple management type practices that we can start to move toward, and to help manage water both on the farm and from a larger watershed perspective.
So you're not talking about installing all kinds of infrastructure on a farm?
That's right. Yeah, not at that point. I think that may be a solution for some farms in some locations, but it's certainly not for everyone. And there are practices that almost all farms can do up front that are simple and fairly low cost to help adapt.
That's an interesting point that you say low cost, because that is a huge issue too, is of course how much this is going to cost.
That's right, that's right. And you know, in some instances it may require some additional equipment, but most farmers do have the equipment they need to incorporate organic matter and reduce disturbance on soils.
And so once again, maybe you could just sort of recap for us what this is all coming down to, which is the fact that we've seen that some extreme weather conditions, and that's going to be the forecast for the future.
I think that's right. I think we're going to see more and more of these storm events and flash floods, and on an annual scale, just more water overall. And it's going to be imperative that we try to adapt to this as farmers if we're going to remain productive and producing food. And I think there's some simple things up front, improving our soils, improving soil quality that we can do, and then some other approaches that hopefully we'll be able to do some research on here in the next years.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the research too. What will probably be your number one focus at first?
Well, there are actually, I'm working on a proposal right now to to focus on ways that farmers can use their floodplains in a manner that they will not lose their entire crop or incur significant financial damage if we do have a flood. So planting buffers along streams, but buffers that produce some sort of economic return to the farmer is something we're working on right now, and there are a few ways to go with that, but we have some ideas around biomass production or producing soil amendments within that near stream area. So you get this economic return to a farmer, but you also reduce the risk of flood damage, and you get some of the environmental benefits that go along with stream buffers as well.
Well, Joshua, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
To check out Joshua's website or to find out more about his work, you can go to the UVM Extension Center for Sustainable Agriculture, which is listed on your screen, or call them on the phone number right there on your screen as well. Thank you so much for joining us. That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.
For a video copy of today's program, call toll-free 1-888-ATF-3430. Across the Fence is brought to you as a public service by University of Vermont Extension and WCAX-TV.